Thank you for coming. I'm Mike Sager. My book is Revenge of the Donut Boys, and I'd like to read from you some of it for you tonight. As a journalist, what I decided to do with this story was wanting to do something different. I decided to kind of do a little ensemble cast story instead of having one person that I really focused on. I thought it would be fun to kind of pattern this after what I think is really the best disaster movie of all time, which was the Poseidon Adventure, the first one, where they have this ABC sort of storytelling where you focus on a character and then the character stops, freeze frame, and then you go to the next character, and so I thought I'd just try to do this story like this and tell because there were so many amazing stories of these people who all lived in this place with one way in and one way out, and this fire just rushed upon them in the middle of the outback. So as I set about to do this, and when I do these stories, I use kind of the techniques of a novel to tell a true story. So there's characters, scenes, setting, all that stuff, but everything has to be true. So as I set about trying to tell this story, I had to kind of make a timeline, and because it was the night that daylight savings time started, that you fall back and you're supposed to set your clocks back, and the fire happened at around 2 a.m. in this vicinity, I had to first establish with all of the various 30 different people, whether they had set their clock back or not. It really became kind of this Rorschach test of whether you were the type of person who does it at like 8 o'clock p.m. just to make sure that, please, come on in. So that's sort of the background for the story, and it comes up in the text. So you should know that what I was just saying is the night of the wildfire in question that I'm going to be reading about. Please come on in. I haven't started. I'm just starting. So the night of the California wildfire, the deadliest wildfire in history, happened on the night that you set your clocks back in the fall for the end of daylight savings time, and that comes up here that you should know that. Amon Vogel woke to an eerie glow. The smoke was thick. His clock said 4:30 a.m. 58 years old, Amon had lived an eventful life, by anyone's yardstick. He'd hit a grand slam to lead his team to the finals in the 1957 Little League World Series in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. He'd shared an apartment with the Pointer Sisters in San Francisco. He'd lived off the grid as an IRS fugitive and subsistence farmer with a woman he'd taken up with after accidentally shooting her in the leg with a .357 Magnum, she eventually left him, the only woman who'd ever broken his heart. Of late, he was earning his living as a contract dentist. Great money, no overhead, no responsibility, and a never-ending supply of fresh females, as he liked to say with a wink. Amon was many things, but one thing he was not was the kind of guy who goes around changing clocks the night before late daylight savings time ended. In truth, no two of his clocks were ever the same. He lived in the caretaker's house of an old estate called High Meadow Ranch. The main house had long ago burned to the ground. The vast acreage had once been slated to become an exclusive private golfing community. His ramshackle little house was set in a meadow beside a grove of towering oaks. It was thought by all who visited to be a tiny slice of heaven. Sharing his bed with him that night were his cat and two of his dogs. Two more of his dogs were curled up on the floor. Callahan, the cat, had been with him for more than 18 years. The dogs were all orphans, abandoned in the canyon by families who didn't want them anymore. Now he sat up, swung his feet over the side of the bed. He walked 5 steps to the door that led outside. He turned the handle. The door imploded. Amon flew through the air, slammed against the opposite wall 10 feet distant. He slid down to the floor. He felt a stabbing pain in his side, a cracked rib. He lay there a moment, dazed, thinking that he needed to get up and close the door, when all of a sudden, all of the windows in the house exploded inward. The sound was deafening. Tiny shards of glass flew everywhere. The curtains billowed inward, fully in flames. He looked up. The roof was gone. Out the door, he could see a huge funnel of fire headed toward the house, toward him. It looked like something alive, like a monster from a comic book. The meadow behind the house, the grove of ancient oaks, all of them more than 100 feet tall. Everything was on fire. Every single leaf was burning, every single blade of grass, every shrub, every flower, everything. It reminded him of one of those nuclear explosions you see on television when the bomb goes off and all the trees bend way over and then flip way back up as if blown by gale-force winds, only it was fire this time instead of wind. With some effort, he rose back and walked back into the bedroom. His knees felt funny. He was bleeding from a dozen tiny cuts made by the glass. His rib hurt. It was doubly hard to breathe the smoky air. His arms felt singed and tender. On the bedstand was a fireproof safe he'd bought recently at Sears, guaranteed to 1,000 degrees. Inside was $35,000 in cash he'd won at the Indian casino up the road. Next to the safe was his Glock 9mm pistol. As he passed the bedstand, he thought to himself, I should get the money. I should get the Glock. For some reason, he didn't. He just kept going. Out of the bedroom, through the living room, 2 steps up into the kitchen. With some of his winnings from the casino, he had recently purchased a 1990 Toyota pickup. It was beige with 4-wheel drive, a real cherry. Now he looked up. The 2 front tires and the engine compartment of his new truck were sticking down through what remained of the roof and the kitchen ceiling. He wheeled around. Everywhere across the living room there were little fires, hundreds of them, lighting every nook and cranny. It was a beautiful sight, really. For a second, he thought about this chick he once knew. She loved candles. She liked him to dribble hot wax on her skin. It was getting hotter in the house. He estimated it to be about 500 or 600 degrees. He stood there paralyzed. The smoke was thick. There was fire all around him, blocking every exit. There was nowhere for him to go. I'm going to die. I'm going to burn to death, he thought. This is how it's going to be. I'm going to die burning. An odd feeling of calm came over him. Well, shit. I don't have a wife. I got no kids. I've had a good life. I've done a lot of things. I'll be okay. I hope it doesn't hurt too bad. And then he thought about some of the stuff he'd learned in pre-med. In his mind, he saw a picture of a hospital burn ward. And then he thought about the Glock. It was loaded, one in the chamber like always. It was on the bedside table, next to the money. Is something burning? Do you want to sit down? Hi. Thanks for coming. Often in the past, I'm called, since I got to Esquire, how are you? Since I got to Esquire, they pretty much determine what they'd like me to write about. In the old days, as I said, trying to do these kind of stories, these cultural anthropologies or literary anthropologies, which are all hard to say. It would only fly if I did something that was pretty hardcore, like living with the crack gang in L.A. That was like at the beginning of crack. And there was a gang, the Venice gang in Venice, California, and they were the Mexican gang on one side of the street, and then there was the Shoreline Crips on the other side, the African-American gang. And it was kind of interesting because the whole hip-hop culture really came from the vatos in the Mexican gangs, and they had kind of started out, they dealt the heroin, so they had like the zoot suits and the cars, the lowriders, and that was like their heyday. And this gang, the Venice gang, was the proudest, Mexican-American gang. I mean, they lived in this small little area of Venice, which now if you go by there, it's like where your agent in L.A. might take you out to lunch. It's like really scary to see, Kobe Bryant has an ad agency in that very neighborhood where the Venice 13s used to live. So to go down there, so what happened was when crack came in, the Shoreline Crips became the dealers, and the Mexican Americans became the users, and everything had turned around. So it was a great sort of way of examining, not just the crack culture which was coming in, but the whole culture of hip hop, and how the Pendleton shirts, the loose pants came from the fact that the Mexican guys liked to buy really their khakis too big, and they would take them and they'd fold them inward on each side. They'd fold the waistbands inward and then use a belt to make their own pleats. And then when they went to jail and they had to give up their belts, of course, and that's when the big baggy pants sort of started coming in. But anyway, so for a long time I did these hardcore stories, and then since I've been at Esquire in the last 10 years, they've asked me to do these sort of weird things like go, live with an old man. We want a story about an old man, and I'll never forget, being down there, and I'm like this guy. I've written about crack and heroin users on the Lower East Side, and ice when it first came, smokable crystal meth when it just got to Hawaii. I was there, and all these various weird things. And then they're asking me, we'd like a story about a 92-year-old man. And I remember sitting my first day in a living room with this old guy, and it's like the clock's ticking, and I'm there for 8 hours. And it's like and then I had to go to the cafeteria like twice, which always made me nauseous. I mean, it's just probably one of the most difficult stories I'd ever done. Until this next time when they gave me one of my more difficult assignments. When they asked me to they'd like a story about a beautiful woman. And even though it was tough, I decided to take the challenge. And it did become difficult because once they give you the assignment of finding we want an old man, we want a 17-year-old high school kid, we want a guy who makes $50,000 and lives in San Diego, and what's his life like? We want a beautiful woman. Well, that's great. Well, first of all, it's great because they don't really tell you what that means. So I can add the interpretation to what that means. So I decided what my editor was trying to say was that they wanted a story about this female form that sells us everything. This chick sells us beer and trucks. She sells us cars. She sells women's products. She sells, my wife gets, it's either Shape or Self or one of those magazines, but the girls on the cover of that, it's always a crotch shot. I mean, the girls are always hot. I mean, it's like hotter than Maxim. Really, you women know which magazine I'm talking about. I mean, so it's this female form, and it's like on MTV, and there's always these really fleeting images. So my idea was all right, what he's saying is he wants a story about one of these women who's selling us all this stuff, and my idea was to just, all right, we'll take her and hold her still and hold her up and show her, in as much excruciatingly close detail as I could, think to do. And actually it was a rather long process to find this woman, because then I didn't like her, and I've always been picky. People who know me know I'm picky about my women. And so I finally settled on one. And I really wanted it to be the title piece of this collection. It's called The Secret Life of a Beautiful Woman, which isn't Revenge of the Donut Boys. A little too subtle, perhaps, for the market, and then the marketing ladies at now defunct Thunder's Mouth, which is now part of Da Capo. This is actually the last book published by Thunder's Mouth. As you authors out there might know what that really means. But it has survived, luckily. But so it reminded the women in the marketing department of a romance novel title, so it was nixed in favor of Revenge of the Donut Boys, which is fine. Call it what you want, just publish it, I say. She loves big silver cowboy buckles and chewy red Swedish fish, 3-inch Gucci stiletto heels and Lamborghini trucks. She hates being alone. She doesn't kiss on the first date. She feels high highs and low lows, often in rapid succession. Sometimes she'll push you away because she wants you to try again. She's been offered $30,000 for one night. Her toes are long like fingers. One of them sports a silver ring. She has a tiny tattoo of a cottontail bunny on the nape of her neck, a souvenir of the drunken night on the town with her two best friends, former Playboy centerfolds. She loves backgammon, bowling, dive bars, sunbathing in the nude, gambling in Las Vegas, blackjack, baccarat, pie gal. She loves French lingerie, always in matching sets, and scented candles, oodles of them, all over the room. She loves the word love, and the words romance, ambiance, intimacy, and hot. She's been kidnapped by a bodybuilder, stalked by a Persian nightclub owner, electronically surveilled by an Israeli mobster, relieved of her worldly possessions by a family of wealthy Egyptians, sued by a downstairs neighbor who claimed that her vocal lovemaking destabilized his energy. She has dark eyes and dimples, bright teeth and full lips, a beauty mark on her right cheek, the beginnings of fine lines in the various localities across her heart-shaped face that register emotion. She is the girl next door grown up, feet planted firmly on the summit of her prime, looking expectantly, tentatively, hopefully toward the future. Her speech is punctuated with musical exclamations, "Oh my God! Holy shit! Rad! That's the bomb!" And though she hardly moves her lips when she talks, she can, in fact, carry on a conversation while a makeup artist applies lipstick with a brush. Her tonal range is preternatural, from alto to coloratura, church mouse to screaming Mimi. She invents adjectives, froggy, foofy, fugly. Her take on language is like her take on life. She makes it fun, she makes it fit her needs. She doesn't always care if others understand. She is a Virgo. She was born in 1972. She was born in 1971. She was born in 1970. Her grandfather was a Portuguese sailor. Her father split when she was 2. Her mom worked 3 jobs. Her stepdad parked his car in front of the side door so she couldn't sneak out of the house at night. She used the window. She was an ugly baby, eggplant-colored and hairy, sick all the time. She still coughs like a croupy infant, though somehow it works for her, as does the dog bite scar on her cheek, a cocker spaniel named Lucky, endearing little flaws that take her down a few pegs from perfect, make her seem more real. She giggles freely, laughs conspiratorially, grazes your arm lightly with her fingernails, leans her forehead into the space near yours. She rarely cries. Her most arresting feature is her eyes, deep glittering orbs in almond-shaped settings. She says thank you to every compliment, no matter how small, no matter how tangential. She pays scant attention to things that don't involve her. She doesn't watch the news or read the paper. She doesn't remember names. She hates her own name, Brooke Burke. The way it sounds, the busty double B's, the cutesy double E's. The way it sounds, like chicken talk, buck buck. She is cute as a button, pretty as a picture, eminently fuckable, totally unavailable. Barring one regrettable incident, she is a confirmed serial monogamous, a one-man woman. Since the 8th grade, when the first love of her life deliberately flunked in order to stay behind in the same school with her, she has never gone more than a month without a boyfriend. Her current boyfriend drives a Mercedes V12 convertible, a $120,000 car. She recently misplaced it in a shopping mall parking lot. His name is Garth. His name, Garth, is tattooed on her instep. He is 40, a plastic surgeon, one of the best in Beverly Hills. Brooke and Garth have talked about taking the next step, or at least about taking the step after the next step, because the next step will be moving into this house she is building, a $2.5 million, 7,500 square foot estate home with a 3-story atrium entryway and a fireplace in the master bath. Just yesterday, in fact, 4 days before Christmas, while she was visiting his office, stopping by for a few moments to drop off a picture of herself in a red satin Santa suit, a little holiday surprise for his desk, Garth's great good friend and business manager came right up and gave her a big hug. It was no ordinary hug, this one. It was a huge, strong, lingering hug, you might even say a pregnant hug, followed by a chaste little kiss on the cheek, followed by an arm's-length bicep squeeze and a knowing look. That had never happened before. Never, ever, never. Holy shit. Come to think of it, everyone in the office was acting weird. The receptionist, the nurses, even the techs, looking at her funny, smiling oddly, strange, really strange. And then the business manager just walked right up and wrapped her in this bear hug and kissed her and wished her well and looked at her like, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Something's up, she is sure. Brooke Burke. She went on to, thank you. After that story, Brooke went on to marry Garth and to become the hostess of a show on cable TV called Wild On. Some of you men might have seen it, surfing, where she went from hot place to hot place around town and around the world. Later, she would become even though she told me that she would never expose her kitty for any price, she became a Playboy pinup and one of the most Googled women on the web. and most recently was the hostess of that rock star show on TV. If anyone saw that, she's nearly going to get married, perhaps. The whole story is like something's up, and it sort of ends. Well, you have to read the ending, but there's a bonus ending to it. Would you like to?
Well, I don't want to ruin the ending.
Oh, yeah, definitely don't ruin the ending because we have to sell books. That's the idea. I don't give any of the endings away. This next piece is also from Esquire, but it's from a long ago regime. And the setting for this story was sort of interesting because I was at the time I was assigned this story. I was living out in L.A. in the San Fernando Valley with my wife-to-be at that time, and she was trying to be an actress. She had gone to Carnegie Mellon and studied theater, and they told her, "Oh, well, you're an actress now. You can go out and act." And then she got to Hollywood, and they're like, "Yeah, right. You're not an actress. You'll have to audition." So she did that, and there's actually kind of a neat story in here that I wrote for GQ called "Almost Famous," about a lot of the people that we met when we were living out there. Who, it's interesting because there's the San Fernando Valley on one side, and then there's the Mulholland Mountains. And on the other side, like where Brando and Nicholson live and all those people have their houses. And then on the other side of that is where Hollywood is. So, there really is this mountain. It's a great metaphor. And there's all the wannabe actors and actresses living on the other side. And two of the main people in the story, for instance, are this young woman who, for instance, she was picked to be, and in the first two episodes of Seinfeld, she was Seinfeld's girlfriend. And then, like the third episode, they decided Seinfeld didn't need a girlfriend, so she was out. And she went through several shows like that. And Steve Levy, who is known as Steve Bean, was a well-known guy in the commercials. He was always, if you'd see his face, you'd know him from the batteries and from the, various things in time. But anyway, so. We were all living out there, and it was my birthday, my 35th birthday, and so I said, "Come on, we'll go back to Washington. I had a house there. We'll be at my house for a while, and then I'll have a birthday." And so we had the birthday party, and at my 35th birthday party, I asked her to marry me, gave her the ring, the whole bit, and then she flew back to Los Angeles, and I flew to my next assignment, which was at the Elite International Swingers Fantasy Weekend in Pensacola, Florida. Finally, there's a knock on the door, and Walter drains his glass, sets it on the night table. A candle flickers in the dark. Lurid shadows dance across two double beds in room 416 of the Sunset Lodge. Walter breathes into his hand and sniffs. Well, he thinks, here goes anything. He drops his palms to his thighs and stands, grunting a bit, that noise a man makes when the files of personal history have begun to pile up around him, action resigned but not quite resolved. He looks down at Debbie. You're sure now, right? Debbie watches the candle, a vaguely musky number from the knick-knack store in the mall. Tiny creases score her lips, the corners of her mouth, yet she has about her a gleam of trust and wonderment. She likes her drinks, usually fruit juice and vodka with a straw. When she's done, she'll root around in the ice, search out the last sip, make a loud sucking noise until someone gets irritated. Then she'll giggle and take one last sip. We can always say no, Walter says. I mean, just open the door already, Walter. You're thinking too much again, remember? Thinking. Walter has realized lately that there's too much thinking in his life. He's found that once he starts thinking, a program of pros and cons starts to run. He compares, contrasts, weighs, frets. He replays his failures, sets up his odds. His mind begins to build traps, reasons not to do things. The night before they flew to Pensacola, Walter was in bed, covers up to his chin, trying to imagine what lay in store. A cold drop of sweat rolled across his rib cage. He reached for the phone, called Deb. Do you think we're being crazy? Walter was more than a little apprehensive about being with people who really had a lot of experience, who really had an open lifestyle. If he wanted, he could count on 3 fingers the number of lovers he'd had since 1977. Even he and Deb had never done it. They'd gotten naked one night and talked about AIDS. Then they fell asleep. Now Walter takes a deep breath, thumbs his shirt into his waistband, walks briskly to the door. Right on time, he sings. Howdy, chorus Anne and Michael. Anne is wearing something like a wedding dress, white and lacy, see-through, garter belt, G-string, bustier, veil. Michael is wearing a policeman's uniform. Instead of a nightstick, he carries a 2-foot marital aid. Flesh-colored, veined and rubbery, it has heads at either end. Walter looks at Debbie. Debbie looks at Walter. Nobody told them anything about costumes. I'd like to play you something from my first album, Scary Monsters and Super Freaks. The stories in this book are a little bit different. They kind of... Thank you. Find a good book for me, okay? Thanks a lot. Take it easy. Thanks for coming. Tom Juneau, everyone. Famous Atlanta writer. So the stories in this book are more in the true crime genre. If people say that I sort of am one of the adherents or latter-day adherents of new journalism, a lot of terms. You can tell I've been in colleges. They've got to have terms for everything. I'm working my way down the coast from one creative writing to creative nonfiction to, and they all have a different name for it. But the stories in this book all were influenced by the works of Truman Capote, basically. His story In Cold Blood, with the recent movie that you all know about, where the idea is, really you take all the skills that you learned. I started my career at Creative Loafing as an intern here in Atlanta. That was my first sort of professional job, though I wasn't paid quite yet. And later I went to the Washington Post and sort of worked up from copy boy to reporter. And along the way, I sort of did all the various jobs in old school reporting. They kind of thought it was cute that I'd worked my way up and sort of continued the trend. So I was the night police reporter and the night rewrite guy, cops and courts, general assignment, city. So it was a great education in doing all the things you had to do. And then when it came to doing these big stories about crimes, and it was really just like a million little stories. You had to go to the cops and get the cop records to find the people. You had to go to the courts and you could get testimony. You learned all about the transcriptionists, the court reporters, and you could pay them. It's kind of a very interesting thing. You pay the court reporter for transcripts. So the better magazine you're at, the more money you can spend on all this great stuff that Bob Woodward, when I worked at the Washington Post, he would have this thing he called a docugasm, when you'd get the documents. And it was all very brass balls in that era with Woodward and Ben Bradley, and there's all these terms like holy shit detail and docugasm and gangbang was when they sent out lots of people. But anyway, so the stories in this book, I think 8 of them have either sold to the movies or influenced movies. Probably the biggest one was The Devil and John Holmes, which was used as an inspiration for both Boogie Nights and Wonderland, neither of which I participated in financially. And then one movie that did get made from my story was called Veronica Guerin. It was about a Irish journalist who was killed by the mob in Ireland. And that became a movie with Cate Blanchett and Colin, that handsome guy. I can't remember his name. Thank you. All right, man. You look good. So this is one of probably my favorite story in here, and I never really felt like he was a scary monster or a super freak. But I put it. He's included in this book because you put stuff in a book not knowing that there's ever going to be another one, kind of thing. So, but anyway, I think it needs no introduction. It's called An Imperfect Weekend. At dawn on the 3rd day, Lee Reisler awoke in bed, his face buried in the rumpled nest of his feather pillow. The sheets were warm and soft and familiar, redolent of ivory detergent and dry Mojave air. The chickadees sang in the locust trees outside his window. The fountain gurgled in the grove. He turned his head slowly, luxuriantly, toward the night table, opened his eyes. His clock was in its usual place, as was his book, his glasses, his framed picture of Bryn and the kids. He felt his lips form a smile. He lay there a few minutes, nuzzling into the pillow, swimming languidly upward from the depths of sleep. "Ah, this feels so good," he told himself. "I'm so happy I made it out." He drew a long cleansing breath through his nose, let the air fill his diaphragm, his lungs. He exhaled through his mouth, a light, controlled, sibilant stream. At last, he moved to get out of bed. He'd been gone for a while. There was much to do. But he couldn't get up. He was stuck. What in the world? The odor of dirt and rot and petroleum began filtering into his senses. The Dopplered rush of early morning traffic, the scratch and skitter of small animals, the softness, the sheets, the bedroom faded away, dissolved like a scene in a movie. And he was inside the van again. It was dark and humid. He was trapped. The van, a white Ford Econoline, was upside down, planted hood first on a steep slope in a dense thicket of bushes and trees near the bottom of a ravine just off the shoulder of the highway. Lee was lying nose to roof. The sharp corner of the dome light was beneath the point of his left hip, digging in, stabbing at the same raw spot. His body, outstretched, was tilted at an angle, feet elevated higher than his head. He was buried in an avalanche of shoe boxes and leather sandals, about 800 pairs in 8 different styles, each crafted painstakingly by his own hands. The steering wheel was behind his head, which was crowded against the herniated ruins of the firewall in the dashboard. Thick, overgrown branches, silk oak, Chinese elm, eucalyptus, pepper trees, intruded through the crumpled frame of the windshield and driver's side window, impaling the vehicle against the slope, twisted under its weight. Tangled within the branches were Lee's left arm and shoulder. Exactly how they were tangled he couldn't tell. His left eye, the hazel one, had been blind since birth. His right eye, cornflower blue, was extremely myopic. Given the condition in the van, his position, and his partial blindness, his field of vision was nil. He felt as if he'd been crucified horizontally, nailed by one arm. Slowly he became aware of the pain, a catalogue of pain, varying types and degrees and dimensions. He called out hoarsely to his wife, "Bryn, Bryn," his voice echoing inside the van, thinking that maybe he was dreaming, that maybe he was still in bed and Bryn was in the other room, but there was no response. "Fuck," he screamed inside his mind. "Fuck, this isn't fair." He jerked frantically at his left arm, trying to pull it free, throwing all of his weight against his shoulder and his arm, trying to jar it loose, but the limb wouldn't come, it just wouldn't come, it was stuck, still stuck, and it was throbbing now. He bucked again, knocked his head against something sharp. Stars appeared, shimmering motes of silvery light, floating in the air before him. He paused, winded, wiped his forehead with his hands, came away with a sticky palmful of blood and ants. He'd seen kittens and other baby animals killed by ants, ants crawling out of their mouths and eyes and noses. Soon, when daylight came, the flies would return. They would lay eggs. Maggots would hatch. He imagined his body in the van in a week or so. "I have entered the food chain," he told himself. "I have left the top of the food chain and become part of the lower order." He closed his eyes and tried to collect himself. Suck it up, he thought. Breathe through your nose to conserve moisture. His thirst was unbearable, worse than the pain. His tongue was shriveled at the back of his mouth, dry and leathery and hard. It didn't feel like a tongue at all, more like the meaty flesh of a walnut. And then it hit him. Maybe I'm dead. Lee searched his memory, trying to put things straight. He was sure he'd gotten out. He was sure he'd awoken in bed. In his mind, he could see himself shattering the back window of the van with his feet. He could see himself climbing out of the ravine, strolling into 7-Eleven, telling the Armenian guy behind the counter to pour him a supersized slice and to please call 911. There'd been an accident. He remembered asking for a baggie full of ice, carrying his thumb and his fingers with him into the ambulance. His brow knitted with concentration. That's what I was going to do, he told himself at last. That's what I was planning to do. But I didn't. I'm still stuck. An Imperfect Weekend. I'll just, not to ruin the story, but obviously he got out because he told me the story. And he showed up at my reading in L.A. at Book Soup last time. We had the fat guy's wife was there, and the 17-year-old's brother was there, and this guy, Lee, was there with the book under his stump, kind of carrying it like this. I'd like to finish tonight with something a little more personal. Would you like to do a little song, or do you want to do a song for us? Yeah? You can if you want. What do you think? Do you like audiences? Yeah. This is another story that needs no introduction. Somewhere east of Lost River, along a narrow ribbon of slippery asphalt that dipped and climbed and meandered like a goat trail through the George Washington National Forest, I pulled my rented Trailblazer to a stop before a line of mailboxes, a pitted, muddy road called Sager Hollow. The rain was falling harder now, a thick mist against a white-gray sky, visible above the spindly bare trees and high ridges. The engine idled, burning low test, $2.59 a gallon. The front wipers went swish-swack. The back one countered in a lower register, hunk-thunk, reverberating through the long, empty vehicle, the rental of which, my wife's idea, had first seemed like overkill but now seemed pretty darn wise. It was Easter Sunday. I was in West Virginia. I'd been driving for hours through the mountains, through the fog and the rain, eyes glued to the center line for navigation, big rigs pushing up on my tail. My nerves were frayed. I needed to take a piss. I needed to finish this job and get back home. I lowered the window, the familiar electric hum, and peered down the road into the gloomy afternoon, not quite sure what to do next. The air was heavy with the smells of earth and mold, wood smoke and wet livestock. I'd started this trip in San Diego within sight of the Pacific Ocean. I'd seen the night lights of Las Vegas, the night stars over the Great Plains, the ghostly vapors of dawn in Louisiana Bayou, the glare of the morning sun on freshly fallen snow in the Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania, the stuffy blackness of the guest room in my parents' hermetically sealed condo in Pikesville, Maryland, my bar mitzvah photo on the nightstand. I had a cast on my right hand, broken on a kid's head during a bus fight. 17 days, 6,840-some-odd miles, by air and by Avis, much of it spent clutching a MapQuest printout, trying to manage the trick of using my reading glasses while driving 80 miles per hour, the wind buffeting my high-profile vehicle, the truck drivers playing cat and mouse, some of them, no doubt, sprung to the eyeballs on crystal meth, and me hoping fervently that the much ballyhooed computer intelligent at MapQuest had not forgotten some small but critical detail, say, a right turn onto a certain gravel road, as had been the case only yesterday, leaving me with my bald head craned out the window in a cold and driving rain, backing down a steep slope leading to nowhere. I shall never again decline the extra insurance. Now I was in Hardy County, in the Appalachian Mountains, or rather, I was back here for a second time in as many days, having decided to try one more time to complete my mission. Excuses are not an option to the self-employed. Sitting there in my rented Trailblazer, idling in the middle of the rain-swept road, eyeballing the line of mailboxes, the design and arrangement of which might just as well have incorporated a blinking neon sign that said Dog Patch USA, I felt a slight pang of self-doubt. Maybe this whole thing was foolhardy. Maybe I hadn't done enough prep. Maybe I should have called first. It was, after all, the holiest day on the Christian calendar, and here I come, a reputed Christ killer. There had been no telephone number listed on the website, no email contact either, just a street address, and I use the word street generously, for the Salem Mennonite Church, dating to 1868, average weekly attendance 20, which had turned out to be a picturesque whitewashed meeting house on a sweet little hill with a volleyball net out front and a little graveyard behind, but not a living soul in evidence. I searched my personal data banks for my knowledge of Mennonite customs and practices. Are Mennonites the same as Amish? Do they wear those bonnets? Do they carry firearms? Do they even have telephones? And then something else occurred to me. I couldn't have called them even if I wanted to. My cell phone was not in service, confirming once again my experience that cell phones never work in places you really need them. I took a deep breath and exhaled, lips pursed, a muscle memory from my smoking days. Time like this, I still crave a cig. And then I thought, let's do this thing, which is corny, I know, but my 10-year-old likes me to say it before his basketball games. In 5 years, I'd never missed one of his games, until yesterday, which happened to be his first game in a new season in a tough new league, his first without me coaching. Right about tip-off time, I'd had my head out the window, backing down that hill. Beyond the mailboxes, the denuded winter forest revealed its underlying typography, a large depression on the downside of a mountain slope, known in geologic terms as a hollow, pronounced holler in movies like Deliverance or Coal Miner's Daughter, a sort of backwoods cul-de-sac, this one home to an eclectic collection of buildings and ruins, here a ramshackle barn, there an A-frame log cabin, a wood shack, smoke curling from its crooked chimney, a tar paper outhouse, a suburban-grade split level with whitewashed siding, all of it landscaped with an assortment of junked autos and rusted farm vehicles, discarded major appliances, trailers, occupied and not, and every manner of truck from every era. Presently the dogs appeared, prancing beside the road, barking, talking shit, tracking my progress through their territory like so many homeboys dogging a stranger in the hood. I could feel the human eyes watching me from the windows. I wondered, had my message preceded me? Did they even know I was coming? Down the road a piece, I came upon the place, exactly as described. A little house with tan siding and a white picket fence, with a green sofa set yonder beneath an oak tree. I parked and gathered my things. Before I could reach the steps to the front porch, the door swung open. Out stepped a ruddy-faced man in camouflage hunting cap. Next came a woman in an ankle-length jean skirt. Her hair was swept back primly atop her head. Atop that was pinned a small piece of black lace. It reminded me of a doily. The man and woman stood side by side, American Gothic with an edge. Afternoon, folks. I tipped my watch cap with my first two fingers, playing it casual, down home. In fact, this was my home, my ancestral home, or nearly so. My great-grandfather, Jakob Leib Louis Sager, born in 1869 in a shtetl in Lithuania, had raised his 9 children not far from here, just on the other side of the mountains, in Front Royal, Virginia. I'd spent last night there, having backtracked nearly 130 miles across the state line to find the nearest viable motel room. My great-grandfather Louis had begun his American sojourn at the age of 22. To make his living, he'd take a train from his home in Hagerstown, Maryland, where he lived with his landsmen from the old country, out to rural Virginia, and disembark at a crossroads that looked promising. From there he went farm to farm with a large pack on his back, selling needles and thread, soaps, small kitchen utensils, bolts of cloth, pieces of lath, and other lightweight items targeted to farmers' wives whose language he could barely speak. He'd be gone a week at a time, overnighting in the barns of friendly customers or under the stars, eating the kosher food he'd brought along. Soon he purchased a horse and wagon, a rolling department store. Since cash was scarce among the hardscrabble subsistence farmers in the territory, he began taking fur pelts in trade, which he in turn sold to furriers in the big city. Later he would own 4 stores on the main street of Front Royal, 3 offering clothing, and the 4th a grocery, which did a booming business in pint bottles, 24 to a box, used for moonshine. He continued to sell the bottles during Prohibition, albeit with a slightly higher markup. Of course, The man on the porch in Sager Hollow knew nothing of all this. He went about 6'2", 240. The way the house was built, upon a little rise, the porch was elevated 6 steep steps. Looming there on high, like a preacher on a pulpit, he eyeballed me in my North Face ski shell, Gap cargo pants, and muddy Dr. Martens boots, the strap of my man purse slung across my chest like a bandolier. He worked his shoulders a little bit, uncricked his neck, an audible pop. "How can we help you today, friend?" The way he said friend didn't sound very friendly. Obviously, my message had not gotten through. I rose up to my full 5'5" and put on an earnest smile. "I'm looking for a guy named Mike Sager." The couple exchanged glances. "Who wants to know?" the man asked. "Well," I said, "you're not going to believe this. Call me Mike Sager. Everyone does. It's the way I answer the phone, the way I introduce myself. It's how I think of myself, my symbol, my logo, my brand name, like Prince's glyph. Mike Sager, a random collection of 9 letters from the Latin alphabet, arranged into 2 groups, 1 space in between. The first group upthrust and masculine, like the monuments of the West. The second group rounded and feminine, like those of the East. Mike Sager, the yin and the yang. 3 syllables, easy to say, short and sweet, which my wife, in one of her occasional playful moods, would say describes me perfectly. Mike Sager, a simple name, not a name that leaves room in a conversation for the next sentence. Not a fancy show-off name like my student, Brandon Miller de la Cuesta. Not a cool exotic name like William Least Heat Moon. Not a tragic name like Richard Kuntz, a decent kid who went to my high school. His parents called him Dick. He called himself Dick. I always wondered, what were they thinking? Mike Sager, a name with no baggage, no connotation, just a name, an ordinary name, not too Jewish sounding, thank God, my mother's line, the first anti-Semite I ever knew. A name like a blank canvas or a raw hunk of granite, a name you can work with, chisel into something. Mike Sager, a name of my own choosing. My given name, of course, is not Mike Sager. It is Michael Andrew Sager. Michael, as the people in Baltimore used to say. Michael, one of 8 Michaels in my first grade class, an overweight boy in husky-sized corduroys who cried easily but never backed down from a fight, whose handwriting was poor and whose spelling was atrocious, who spent his entire 3rd grade year sitting in the front of the room, his desk pushed against the teachers. By 5th grade, I was the only member of the smart class who was being shuttled off to the dumb class for math. By junior high, having delayed taking algebra in a foreign language, I was placed full-time in the dumb class. A few years later, they'd start special ed. Some of my colleagues would end up there. Then I just started going to summer camp 2 months away from home. I discovered sports. I got pretty good. I ended up on the soccer team at Emory University, 800 miles from Pikesville. New start, clean slate. I made varsity my freshman year. They listed me on the roster as Mike Sager. From there, things began to turn around. Mike Sager was not Michael Sager. He was a winner. He was popular. He did pretty well. He got into a good law school, and then he quit law school after 3 weeks to work at one of the world's best newspapers, albeit as a copy boy on the graveyard shift. And then in 1978, a really big thing happened. I got my first big league credit. By Mike Sager. That's me. A body of work, a lifetime of actions, large and small. What's in a name? To me, everything. So you can imagine my surprise on that day some years ago, being newly connected to the internet, a bit of a late adopter, when I decided to type the 9 Latin letters of my name into this wondrous new tool they called a search engine. Remember your first Google? In a matter of milliseconds, the results appeared. I was gut-shot. There were other Mike Sagers. Tons of them. At first, I was outraged. I mean, Mike Sager is not exactly John Smith. How could there be others? What right did they have to use my name, a name I'd built from the ground up? Time passed. The demands of everyday life interceded. I tried to forget them. But as often the case, the things you hate become a prickly fascination. I found myself wondering, who are these guys? And that began my journey to meet. I identified 39 other Mike Sagers, and I had the budget for meeting 11. All because I didn't have a story assignment, and my editor asked me what was going on. And I was trying to do this website for my first book, and I said, oh, there's all these other assholes who think their name is Mike Sager. Oh, what a great story, why don't you do that? Anyway, thank you very much for coming. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
I wondered, when you had to seek out, was it Glenn?
The old man?
How did you find it? And in the story, the detail, such as observing, the dust fluttering, in front of the alarm clock. Did you see everything? And were you with him? I was wondering, how did you approach him to just be with him?
Right. Well, first of all, it starts out very much like a regular reporter would do. You get an assignment, so you got to find, when I teach the kids, I call it the toilet bowl theory of journalism, where you have to jump in and flush and you rim around, and then finally you go off down to the place where you're trying to get. In this case, it's like identifying old people. They say, we want a portrait of an old guy. And so I'm thinking, not far from home, Arizona, lots of old people, great, And then Sun City. So I call there, I say, can you round me up some people? I think I talked to the woman who was like the PR woman for the old people, at the Sun City. They had everybody's got a job, something to be important to, as the old man would put it. And then so I basically set up like a series of interviews with get me 5 guys. So I went and met the 5 old people. And then I liked this guy the best, and one reason was because for years, he wrote first those, like the family Christmas letter. Well, he had made that into this preoccupation, and in later life turned it into a column in wherever senior living he would. And the guy had been retired for more than 30 years. I mean, longer than I had actually been working. So I found he was, and the thing with the details was, if you've ever visited a grandparent, it's excruciatingly detailed. If they're, you're like, there's nothing to do. I mean, he would take a nap every day, because you learn that when people get that old, they're distilled to their essence, and his essence was so sweet and kind. But he had 5 stories. He was probably in better shape really than I was. I mean, he took less medicine, and he was really doing well. But so every day he would go and he'd take a nap, and I would take a whole sheath of his writings and go Xerox them. And so a lot of the memory that I got is extracted from that. But the way I did that part in the beginning was he didn't do well on the phone. So I'd been there for 3 weeks, came home, transcribed all my notes, and I decided what I wanted to do was, wake up with him. So I called him, and I arranged to come there. And so I came one afternoon, hello, we had dinner. And I would let him drive me around in his car. I was hazardous. And then so we arranged that he would leave his door open and that I could come in at his wake-up time and watch him wake up. And we were, by that time, we were close enough that I could do that. And so I went back, and it's kind of an interesting thing because stories often coincide with things in your own life. And I had been earlier, I'd been fired from GQ in a political shake-up just after I'd moved to San Diego. And then by the time I caught on with Esquire, they had already had sort of their salary cap positions filled, and so I couldn't take less money, so I took half of a job, and the half of a job included a couple small things and one big story, and this old story was the big story, and so here it is. This is going to be whether or not I get a full job for next year, and I just spent $17,000 on landscaping, and all of you yuppies like me will understand that. And so it's and I'm known for writing about drug gangs and all that stuff, and I have to do this old guy story, and it's kind of interesting. So when I came down, just that it was just going to be for 36 hours to see him wake up. Well, he then made me breakfast in his way of making breakfast, and then so I was going to be helpful, and I put the dishes in the dishwasher. And I heard this little pop in my back as I was doing it. I woke up the next morning in excruciating pain in my hotel room, and I had to crawl to the bathroom. And it was one of those moments where you think, in the movies, these would be guns, bullets ricocheting on it, but in real life, it's just you have to pee and you can't get out of bed, and you're like oh, But anyway, I went to the airport, and then I had to be wheeled, to the plane, and I was in I was in sort of this state of grace. I was in so much pain. I was in like this amazing state, and then I was being wheeled through the airport, and I this guy. Nobody was looking at me in the chair, and then they wheeled me up with all the old people, they put you drooling in line for the door, And so it was a great confluence of events, contemplating his life and retirement, and me sort of moving, thinking about retirement as why wait, go to someplace now rather than wait till you're old, and that's why I moved to San Diego. So it was oftentimes I try to take what's in my life and use it in the story, so that way I can empathize and understand. And so I was going through a passage, as was he, and so it was a great time in my life to sort of do that piece. And oddly enough, of all the 20 stories that I've done, all the exciting that have been nominated for the National Magazine Award by magazines, only one has ever gotten into the finals, and it was old. So, any other questions? Thank you all for coming. Please buy a book. The signature is free, as we say, in the book-selling business. I'll be glad to sign it in any way that you wish. And thank you to Acapella Books in there. And thank you to Creative Loafing, my alma mater of newspapers, who I will, always be, and I'm so proud of them. And becoming, this little alternative weekly is now a conglomerate, which, it's not so alternative, I guess, anymore, but it's still like a great place where people get to write pieces, that are seldom seen in the newspapers and pretty precious in magazines anymore, too, as a place where writers can write and express their fingers. So anyway, thanks to Creative Loafing.
Kind words are not going to give you hard.
Please. So thanks.